Zulfi Bhutto of Pakistan. His Life and Times by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 16. Zulfi's Fall. From Martial Coup to Martyrdom. 5th July 1977 to 4th April 1979. Politics is not the illegal seizure of state machinery. Zulfi wrote to Zia from his stinking dark cell in Pindi's now demolished prison. Politics is not the conversion of a flowering society into wasteland. Politics is the soul of life. It is my eternal romance with the people. Only the people can break this eternal bond. To me, politics and the people are synonymous. You and your coterie have no right to take away my spiritual and imperishable links with the beloved people of my country. It is an inseparable part of my heritage. My blood is in the blood of Pakistan. I am a part of its dust, a part of its aroma. The tears of the people are my tears. A smile on their beautiful face is a part of my smile. My destiny is in the hands of the people. Only the people have the right to sever or seal their affinities with me. Have you not done enough? Surely your thirst for senseless revenge is not completely unquenchable. Is your appetite for primitive vendetta so insatiable as to stop at nothing? Whereas you take so much pride in being a soldier of Islam, an expression which you stole from my speech at the Islamic Summit Conference. Are you true to anyone? And what have you learned from the sacred principles of Islam? Does Islam teach you to break your oath? Does Islam tell you to fabricate false cases and hound your Mohsin, your mentor? Does Islam tell you to bow before Hindu India? My Islam and the Islam of the poor and exploited masses of Pakistan teaches us magnanimity and fidelity. Islam teaches the virtues of justice. What justice can I expect from you? The conspirator who dislodged his own prime minister by the force of arms is stopped from sitting in judgment against him? This has been more than abundantly established by the Kabra persecution, by the shameless victimization and malignant vilification you have done in the last 6 months. Each minute, each hour, and each day of your despotic rule is a living testimony of your hatred and enmity towards me. My persecution, which is without parallel in the contemporary history of the subcontinent, is a matter of public knowledge. The views you have expressed in your interviews, what you have told foreign leaders, is also within my knowledge. The day of accounting awaits every individual. I cannot take accounts from a mighty general like you, but before the final accountability on the day of judgment, I have no doubt that you will be taken to the door of Shahbaz Qalandar for the blood you spilt. I would be a dishonest coward if I did not tell you how determined are my people to see the dawn of that day. Please do not misunderstand. I am in no position to threaten you. I am only attempting to inform you that you have deeply violated the finer sentiments of our people and aroused their eternal hostility. General, please do not overstep the bounds under the intoxication of power. You have no right to disqualify me from the public life of this country. You have no authority or mandate to take such a fatal decision. You sublimely think that you can, with naked arbitrariness, disqualify from public life the former elected President and Prime Minister of Pakistan and the true leader of the people. It is preposterous. From beginning to the end, the whole scheme is perverse. We will meet one day. You pursue me now. Wait till I pursue you. Zulfi penned that last letter to Zia in his cell, just weeks before his death. He did not expect an answer, nor did he hope for any final act of clemency from the man who feared him much more now that he was his prisoner than he ever had when he served the Prime Minister Bhutto as his Chief of Army Staff. As chief, Zia had owed Zulfi only his job, but as the president who usurped his power by abrogating the constitution, he owed him his life, which was the reason Zia would never pardon him or show any mercy, though he solemnly promised several Arab heads of state, including the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, that he would do so. There had been 9 justices on the Supreme Court of Pakistan when the last trial of Zulfi Bhutto started in October of 1977. By the time the court was ready to hear Bhutto's appeal from that verdict, Justice Kaisar Khan had retired and Justice Wahiduddin Ahmad was too sick to remain on the bench. Yahya Bakhtiar had initially hoped for a 5-4 decision in favor of reversal of High Court's verdict, counting not only on the 3 justices who finally voted for Bhutto's acquittal, Justices Dorab Patel, G. Safdar Shah, and Muhammad Halim, but also on Justices Wahiduddin Ahmad and Kaisar Khan. With the latter two gone, the verdict handed down by Chief Justice Anwarul Haq on 6 February 1979 was to dismiss the appeal, confirming the Lahore High Court's verdict and death sentence by the narrowest margins of 4-3. Chief Justice Anwarul Haq took more than 800 pages of foolscap to write the casting vote decision that sent Zulfi Bhutto to his death. He dismissed all the errors and illegalities in the Lahore High Court's trial as totally irrelevant to the verdict. More relevant, however, was that the 4 justices who voted to hang Bhutto were from Punjab. The 3 who voted to free him were not. I went to interview the by then retired Anwarul Haq in his home in Lahore a decade later, but he refused to say anything more about his judgment or his impressions of Mr. Bhutto than he had in his written verdict. But if you want to know about my training and qualifications as a justice of the Supreme Court, he told me, you should go see our great Justice Cornelius, who was my mentor. He is very old and has been too sick of late to leave his bed, but he lives in Falate's Hotel, and he might be willing to speak to you. The venerable retired justice was indeed on his deathbed in that once grand and famous, now shabby and faded hotel near the heart of Lahore. Yet he seemed cheered to have a visitor and reminisced for almost an hour, chain smoking as he lay on his bed, indulging in my only pleasure. He talked a bit about law, but ventured no opinion of Mr. Bhutto or the infamous trial other than to say, I'm sure they did the right thing. Before leaving, I asked if he had been born in Lahore. Oh no, I was born in India. Indian Christian, you see. But at the time of partition, I was in the judicial service in India, and some Muslim friends told me to come to Pakistan. It would be much easier for me to get promoted here, and they were right, of course. I could never have become Chief Justice in India without any barrister training, you see. Then when I got here, I decided to throw in my lot with the Punjabis and settle down in Lahore, because you can't trust a Sindhi. Still another variant of siyasat, provincial conflict and mistrust, ancient geohistoric fears, taboos, and terrors, the sources long forgotten, but with legacies of pain evergreen in the hearts of brimful parochial prejudice. Punjabi distrusting Sindhi, Balochi suspicious of both, and half the tribesmen along the northwest frontier holding rifles loaded with the ready ammunition. cocked to fire at the other half. Where then was that land of the pure called Pakistan, for which one Qaid had worn out his pain racked life, and the other was now about to be hanged before the dawn of April 4th, 1979? The longer martial law remains, the shorter will be the remaining life of Pakistan. Zulfi wrote from his death cell. Sindh will say Khuda Hafiz, goodbye, before Balochistan and NWFP. The Indians made two leaders select the Janata Prime Minister. One was Jai Prakash Narain and the other was a Sindhi, Acharya Kripalani. Also, Advani is very powerful. The dream of their life is to get back Sindh, the Sindh of Shah Latif and the Karachi port, the exploited and raped Sindh, the Sindh of the Sufis. The Hindus of Sindh always considered Sufism to be a bridge between Hindus and Muslims. All these forces are more active than ever before. Pakistan is decomposing fast. In Europe, there was Balkanization. Here, there will be Bangladeshization. The process is in motion. Thanks to Zia's follies, it has been accelerated. If I am not a part of Pakistan, in that case, Sindh is not a part of Pakistan. My roots in the soil of this land are very deep, much deeper than of those who came across the border due to disturbances or fear of disturbances. My genesis to political fame is written in the stars. The last days come for every actor on the stage. There is no exception to this immutable rule. There are no nightmares more dreadful than the last days of a usurper, of a man who stabs his own benefactor. Brutus did it to Caesar to prevent despotism. Brutus is an honorable man, and so are all of them. Yes, all of them are honorable men, the engines of opposition and the symbols of ingratitude. For over a year and a half, I have been in solitary confinement. I have not left the death cell to have a shaft of sunshine or the embrace of fresh air. I am the Rana, Lord of Shah Latif. In that sense, I am the Rana of not only Larkana, but of the whole of Pakistan, and if no longer of the whole of Pakistan, certainly of Sindh. We are on a razor's edge. The sun had gone down and the final appeal had been denied, and Zulfi knew there would be no clemency, no mercy, no presidential pardon, though most leaders of virtually every nation on earth except India had appealed for mercy to Zia on his behalf. All our instruments and levers have been taken away, neutralized, or liquidated. But we must fight back to the last drop of our blood. We must be the last to throw the ace. Zulfi growled out from his dark cell. Zia is frustrated. We are dealing with a very strange and mercurial person, a liar and a double crosser. He is desperate. Zia told me it's either his neck or mine. Minister Roedad Khan recalled. He said, I have not convicted him, and if they hold him guilty, my God, I am not going to let him off. Then Secretary General of the Ministry of the Interior, Ruedad Khan, was responsible for digesting the many mercy petitions and pleas that came to Pakistan from the heads of state the world over. Those appeals were summarized so that they could be submitted to the president in only a few pages, permitting him to read them more easily. But that boiling down process took a lot of time, or so it seemed to Zia, who was impatient to get the hanging over with and done. So the president's office kept calling Ruedad Khan to ask, why are you taking so long? Because he could not be hanged until the last of those mercy petitions, all to be rejected, had first been digested. I went with Hafiz Pirzada to the jail, and we were told by the officer in charge, "You can stay today as long as you like. It's your last interview with him." Yahya Bakhtiar recollected. The decision had been made but not yet announced, and the guards were alerted. The next day, despite the prison guard's orders, Yahya went again to visit his weak and weary friend. We had a cup of tea. He was pessimistic in his heart of hearts. I found him in great pain. Benazir wrote to prison authorities after one of her weekly visits to her father in his Pindi death cell. An infection of the gums, which were full of pus and bleeding. His mouth was swollen, and he kept having to wipe the pus and blood with his handkerchief. So severe, it is visible to the eye in the poor light. If immediate attention is not paid to clearing the gum infection, the blood and pus will pass into his bloodstream. Because of Benazir's appeal, Dr. Zafar Niazi, one of Pakistan's most eminent dental surgeons, who had been Zulfi's dentist for more than a decade, was permitted periodically to visit his most famous patient. He was unsuccessful at relieving the acute periodontal pain, whose source may have been pancreatic or liver disease that had plagued Zulfi's last years. We tried to get him released from the small and terrible prison cell, Niazi recalled, but Zia hoped he would die a natural death in there, knowing how little he could eat. Begum Nusrat and Benazir were both detained in Sehala's police camp several miles from Pindi's district jail death cell, where the gallows were being tested on 3rd April 1979. That morning, they were unexpectedly taken outside and driven to Rawalpindi's black prison for their final meeting with the chairman of the Pakistan People's Party, they now jointly led as his political heirs and legatees. And far to the south, in the heart of Sindh's Larkana district, troops cordoned off the Bhutto ancestral home and burial village, Ghadi Khudabakhsh, where the remains of at least 6 generations of Bhutto had blended into the blood-colored soil and rusty dust of a civilization whose Sindhi roots reached back more than 5,000 years to an urban mound of the dead, Mohenjo-daro. At 2 a.m. on 4th April 1979, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was taken from his death cell to the gallows in Pindi's dark prison fortress and hanged by the neck until pronounced dead. "No!" The scream burst through the knots in my throat. Wrote Benazir of that darkest hour. "Papa, Papa." I felt cold, so cold in spite of the heat, and couldn't stop shaking. There was nothing my mother and I could say to console each other. At 4 a.m., Zulfi's body was flown from Chaklala airport to Larkana, where rain had fallen most unseasonably that night. Zulfi's first wife, his cousin Shirin, was brought to Ghadi Khudabakhsh at dawn from the neighboring village of Naudero to join Mumtaz's relatives and servants at a fresh grave dug next to Sir Shah Nawaz's and Bhutto clansmen. As rosy fingers of light blushed the eastern sky, 2 army helicopters landed near the Bhutto village. Soldiers swiftly transferred the coffin from one of the dark choppers to an ambulance, waiting to drive it to the grave. Neither Begum Nusrat nor Benazir had been informed in time to fly down to witness the burial, nor did any of his other children know as yet that Papa was dead. Both boys were in London and Sunny was back at Harvard. Nazar Muhammad, a lifelong Larkana servant of the Bhuttos, was permitted to help bury his Qaid, and later recalled that his face shone like a pearl. He looked the way he had at 16. His skin was not of several colors, nor did his eyes or tongue bulge out like the pictures I'd seen of men that Zia had hanged in public. I turned Bhutto Sahib's face to the west, towards Makkah. His neck was not broken. There were strange red and black dots on his throat, however, like an official stamp. Fearing possible riots, Zia had rushed to have it over and done with before dawn. Contrary to the Pakistani prison code for hangings, he had ordered Zulfi Bhutto's murder in the dead of night. Then Zia felt, for the first time in 21 months, that he could breathe easy. And soon he would announce gleefully to his henchmen, "The bastard's dead." Ziaul Haq, the general who would ruthlessly rule Pakistan for the next 9 years, Benazir reflected in her autobiography. For almost 2 years, I had done nothing but fight the trumped up charges brought against my father by Zia's military regime. Yet, not until yesterday, 3rd April 1979, had I allowed myself to believe that General Zia would actually assassinate my father. At 26, Benazir took up the mantle for her father's leadership, first of his party and later of his nation. The next election, which Zia still promised he would soon announce, might be fought by the Pakistan People's Party under Chairman Begum Nusrat, but Benazir was her father's true political heir, and wherever she went or spoke, people cried out, "Jie Bhutto." Little less than a miracle it seemed, to most Sindhis at least, for though Zia and his minions reported to the world that Bhutto was dead, here was Bhutto, reborn, and so much more beautiful. "Bhutto lives" was the political battle cry that swept over Pakistan, from Karachi to Peshawar, from Larkana to Lahore, long before the promised election date in November, which Zia finally did announce, only to cancel, however, again and again. Each time the chosen day drew near, it became clear that the moment General President, who would soon become the United States' frontline defender of freedom against the Soviet in Afghanistan, that he could never win a free and fair election against Zulfi Bhutto, who lived through his dauntless daughter Benazir. On 17th August 1988, General Ziaul Haq, with most of his top command and US Ambassador Arnold Raffel and Brigadier General Herbert Wassam, went down to fiery deaths in a mysterious plane crash shortly after takeoff from Bahawalpur Airways. A few months later, free and fair elections were held throughout Pakistan under the watchful eye of the interim president Ghulam Ishaq Khan, and Benazir Bhutto soon stepped into her father's office as Prime Minister. That reincarnation of Zulfi Bhutto's first People's Party government lasted less than 2 years. In August of 1990, President Ghulam Ishaq Khan, with the full support of the army, dismissed Prime Minister Bhutto and announced new elections before year's end, which the Pakistan People's Party lost. There remains a powerful, persistent, possibly growing but certainly underlying mystic belief held by millions of Pakistanis, not only Sindhis but the Punjabis, the Balochis, and Pathan frontiersmen, as well, that Shaheed, martyr Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was never hanged, that he never died. Zulfi Bhutto lives on, they say, and he always will.